Imagine stepping onto a wooden ship and knowing you might not see land again for months. There was a time when a pirate ship could disappear beyond the horizon and not return for months. No radio, no engine, no refrigerator, no satellite, no way to call for help. Just a wooden ship, a crew of exhausted men, and an ocean stretching farther than the eye could see. To survive at sea for months, pirates needed more than courage. They needed discipline, they needed knowledge, and sometimes they needed to become comfortable with the possibility that they might never see land again. Imagine waking before sunrise. The ship is rolling beneath your feet. The sails snap violently above you. Salt water covers the deck. The horizon looks exactly the same in every direction. No buildings, no roads, no trees, no smoke from a distant village, nothing, only water. And somewhere beneath that water, thousands of feet of darkness. For a pirate crew, the first enemy was not another ship, it was thirst. The ocean was everywhere, yet almost none of it could be safely drunk. A pirate could be surrounded by water and still die because his body desperately needed fresh water. That is why water was one of the most valuable things aboard a sailing ship. It was stored in barrels. Wooden containers lined the lower parts of the ship, protected from direct sunlight as much as possible. But even with careful storage, water could become stale. It could develop an unpleasant smell. It could become contaminated. And every sailor knew the same terrifying rule. Once the fresh water was gone, there was nowhere to replace it. That meant every cup mattered, every barrel mattered, every drop mattered. A careless crew could destroy its own chances of survival before ever reaching land. Food created another problem. There were no freezers, no supermarkets, no fresh produce arriving every few days. Pirates had to carry enough food to survive long voyages. That meant choosing foods that could endure: salted meat, dried fish, hard biscuits, beans, peas, grains, cheese. Anything that could survive without spoiling quickly became valuable. But preserved food came with its own problems. Salted meat was extremely salty. Hard biscuits could become infested with insects. Food could become moldy. Barrels could leak. And rats could turn stored provisions into their own private feast. Imagine opening a food barrel after weeks at sea, only to discover that something had already gotten there first. That was not an inconvenience. That could become a death sentence, because a pirate ship did not carry an unlimited supply of food. Every meal reduced the amount remaining, and every delay meant more meals were needed. This created a strange calculation. The captain could not simply ask, "How much food do we have?" He had to ask, "How many days can we survive with what we have?" That difference could determine whether the ship reached land or became a floating graveyard. But food and water were only the beginning. The ship itself had to survive. A wooden sailing vessel was constantly being attacked by the ocean. Waves slammed against its hull, salt water soaked its ropes, wind tore at its sails, wood swelled, wood cracked, metal corroded, ropes frayed. A tiny leak could become a serious problem if nobody noticed it. So sailors constantly worked. They repaired sails, they tightened ropes, they pumped water from the lower decks. They inspected the hull, they cleaned the ship, they replaced damaged boards, they maintained the masts. A pirate ship might look romantic from a distance. Black sails against a sunset, a crew standing proudly on deck. But life aboard it was exhausting. There was always something that needed fixing, and there was nowhere to escape the work. If you became tired, you still worked. If you became sick, you still had responsibilities. If the weather became violent, everyone had to move. The ocean did not care whether you were exhausted. It did not care whether you were afraid. It did not care whether you had been awake for 2 days. And then there was navigation. Today, a sailor can look at a screen and instantly know where a vessel is. Pirates had no such luxury. They depended on knowledge, the position of the sun, the stars, the direction of the wind, the behavior of currents, the shape of coastlines, and instruments that helped them estimate their position. A skilled navigator could look at the night sky and recognize familiar patterns. The stars became their map. The ocean became their road. But the road constantly moved. Currents could push a ship far from its intended course. Storms could force a vessel to change direction. Clouds could hide the stars. Fog could erase the horizon. One wrong calculation, repeated over days, could place an entire crew hundreds of miles from where they believed they were. And that created another terrifying problem. Land could become impossible to find. A ship might know where it was supposed to be, without knowing where it actually was. That was when experience mattered most. The captain watched the sea. The navigator watched the sky. The crew watched everything else. And every person aboard had a role. Because survival at sea was not an individual achievement. It was a collective one. A pirate who refused to work could endanger everyone. A sailor who wasted water. But before we sail any farther, matey, if you're enjoying this journey, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, would you survive months at sea with a pirate crew? Drop your answer below. Now, enough talk. The tide is rising, the wind is changing, and our voyage continues. Could shorten the voyage. A man who ignored a damaged rope could contribute to a disaster. On a long voyage, small mistakes became large problems, and small habits could save lives. That is why pirates developed routines. Meals were controlled, water was rationed, work was divided, watch schedules were established. Someone always needed to remain awake, even during the darkest hours of night, because a ship could be attacked while everyone slept. A storm could appear, a sail could tear, another vessel could emerge from the darkness, or the ship could simply drift into danger. So the crew worked in shifts. While some slept, others watched. While some repaired the ship, others navigated. While some prepared food, others handled the sails. The ship never truly slept, and neither did the responsibility of keeping it alive. But perhaps the greatest secret of surviving months at sea was something pirates understood better than most people. You could not fight the ocean every day. Sometimes you had to respect it. A captain who chased every opportunity could waste precious supplies. A crew that pushed too hard could exhaust itself. A ship that ignored the weather could be destroyed. Survival often meant knowing when to wait, when to slow down, when to turn away, when to protect the ship instead of chasing another prize. Because the greatest treasure on the ocean was not always gold. Sometimes it was another sunrise, another barrel of water, another intact sail, another day without disaster, and far beyond the horizon. The pirate crew continued sailing. The land had disappeared weeks ago. The water barrels were getting lighter. The food stores were shrinking. A storm was forming somewhere ahead. And the captain had just received terrible news. One of the largest water barrels was leaking. The crew gathered around it in silence. Nobody spoke. The captain placed his hand against the wet wood. A single drop of water fell onto the deck, and then another and another. The ocean surrounded them, but their fresh water was disappearing, one drop at a time. The captain looked toward the endless horizon. They were still hundreds of miles from land, and the voyage was only beginning. The barrel was still leaking, drop by drop. The fresh water disappeared onto the wooden deck. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The crew understood what that meant. They could survive hunger for a while. They could repair a damaged sail. They could endure storms. But without fresh water, the ocean itself could become their grave. The captain finally ordered the barrel opened. The cooper brought a hammer, one strike, then another. The wooden lid cracked. Inside, the water was lower than anyone expected. Far lower. The leaking barrel had been losing water for days, perhaps weeks. Nobody knew. The captain stared into the darkness of the barrel. Then he turned toward his crew. "From this moment," he said, "every man gets less." No one complained. They knew there was no alternative. The ration was reduced. A small cup in the morning, another later in the day. Nothing more unless the captain approved it. The crew hated the decision, but they understood it. On land, thirst was an inconvenience. At sea, thirst was mathematics. Every person required water. Every day consumed another portion. Every delay consumed more. A storm that slowed the ship could cost hundreds of cups. A broken mast could force the crew to remain at sea longer. A wrong course could turn a short voyage into a desperate one. And now, their calculations had changed. The ship needed land, soon, but the ocean gave them no promise. For the next several days, the crew became obsessed with the horizon. Every man watched for something. A bird, floating branches, a cloud that seemed different, a distant shape, anything that might suggest land was nearby. But the horizon remained empty. Blue above, blue below, blue everywhere. The days passed. Then the weather changed. The sky became pale. The wind weakened. The sails began hanging almost motionless from the masts. The ship slowed. At first, the crew welcomed the calm. No violent waves. No rain. No dangerous wind. But soon they understood the problem. A sailing ship without wind could barely move. The ocean became a giant sheet of glass. The ship drifted. The crew waited. Hours passed. Then a full day. The heat became unbearable. The deck burned beneath their feet. The barrels became precious beyond gold. Men stopped speaking unnecessarily. Every movement consumed energy. Every breath felt dry. The captain watched the sails. Nothing. Then one sailor shouted, "Bird!" Everyone turned. A small seabird circled above the ship. For a moment, hope spread across the deck. Land. Maybe land was close. But the bird disappeared into the distance. The crew watched until it was gone. Nothing followed. No coastline, no island, no trees, only ocean. That night, the captain called the navigator to his cabin. They studied the charts. The navigator pointed to their estimated position. "If the current has pushed us east," he said, "we could be farther from land than we think." The captain stared at him. "How far?" The navigator hesitated. "Far enough." The captain said nothing, because sometimes the most frightening answer was not a number. It was uncertainty. They needed wind, they needed rain, they needed land, and they needed luck. Then, on the fourth morning, clouds appeared. Dark clouds, huge clouds. The crew watched them rising across the horizon. At first, nobody celebrated. They knew clouds could bring something far more dangerous than rain, a storm. The captain ordered the crew to prepare. Sails were adjusted. Loose equipment was secured. barrels were tied down. The ship was made ready. The wind arrived suddenly. The sails snapped. The ship leaned. Men grabbed ropes. Then came the rain, not a gentle shower, a wall of water. The sky opened. Rain hammered the deck. For a few seconds, the crew simply stood there. Then they moved. Every container they possessed was brought onto the deck. Buckets, barrels, pots, anything capable of holding water. The crew collected the rain as quickly as they could. The same ocean that had surrounded them for weeks was now delivering the one thing they desperately needed: fresh water. The captain shouted orders over the storm. Cover the food! Secure the barrels! Keep the sails under control! Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the ship. But nobody cared about the noise. They cared about the water. When the storm finally weakened, the crew examined their supplies. The leaking barrel was no longer their greatest concern. They had replenished enough water to continue. The men were exhausted, but for the first time in days, they smiled. They had survived another crisis. Yet the ocean had not finished with them, because food was becoming the next problem. The hard biscuits stored below deck had been aboard for weeks. They were supposed to remain edible for a long time. But when the cook opened one of the containers, he found movement. Tiny insects. The biscuits were infested. The crew stared. Some cursed. Others laughed bitterly. After weeks at sea, even spoiled food could look like a treasure. The cook examined the biscuits. He knew what had to be done. The worst pieces were thrown away. The rest was shaken and cleaned as best as possible. Then they were baked again. The crew ate them. Nobody complained, because at sea, perfection was a luxury. Survival was the goal. Salted meat became their primary food. Beans were cooked slowly. Dried vegetables were soaked in water when enough was available. Meals became simpler, smaller, more carefully measured. And the captain began calculating again. How many days of food remained? How much water? How far to the nearest known port? How much could the ship safely consume each day? The numbers were becoming uncomfortable, but there was another resource aboard the ship that was even more important than food: knowledge. The oldest sailors knew how to read the sea. They watched the color of the water, the movement of birds, the direction of floating debris, the behavior of clouds. They knew that certain fish could appear near land. They knew that birds could sometimes reveal the direction of a coastline. They knew the smell of land could occasionally travel over the water before land itself became visible. These details were invisible to an inexperienced sailor, but to someone who had spent decades at sea, the ocean was speaking constantly. The crew began noticing something. The water had changed color. It was no longer the deep blue they had seen for weeks. It was slightly greener. The navigator crouched near the side of the ship. He studied it carefully. Then he looked toward the horizon. "Shallow water," he said. The captain turned. "Are you certain?" "No." A pause. "But I think we're getting close." The crew gathered along the rail. Everyone stared forward. Then someone saw it. A tiny shape, almost invisible, a dark line beneath the clouds. Another sailor shouted, "Land!" The word exploded across the deck. Men climbed onto barrels. Others ran toward the bow. Some laughed. Some shouted. One sailor simply dropped to his knees after weeks surrounded by nothing but water. Land had become more beautiful than gold. The ship changed course. The crew worked faster. The captain ordered the sails adjusted. The wind pushed them forward. But as the shape grew larger, the navigator's expression changed. He was staring at the coastline. There was something wrong. The land ahead was not marked on their charts. not clearly, not where it should have been. The captain approached him. "What is it?" The navigator slowly shook his head. "I don't know." The coastline grew closer. Tall cliffs emerged from the mist. Dark trees covered the hills. There was no harbor, no village, no smoke, no signs of people, only a narrow strip of beach beneath enormous cliffs. The captain looked at the map, then at the land. The two did not match. The crew had finally found land, but they had no idea what land it was, and after months of trusting charts, stars, and experience, they were about to discover that the ocean still had places that no map could explain. The captain lowered the telescope. "Prepare the longboat." The crew stared at the silent coastline. They had spent weeks praying to see land. Now that it had finally appeared, nobody wanted to be the first man to step onto it. The longboat touched the water just after sunrise. For several minutes, nobody climbed into it. The coastline remained silent. Dark cliffs rose above a narrow strip of pale sand, and beyond them stood a dense forest unlike anything the crew had seen during the voyage. No smoke, no houses, no church tower, no dock, no fishing boats, nothing that suggested human life. Yet it was land. After weeks of endless ocean, that alone felt like a miracle. The captain selected 6 men. They lowered themselves into the longboat. One carried a water container, another carried a knife, the navigator carried a compass, and the captain carried the ship's chart. As the longboat moved toward shore, the rest of the crew watched from the deck. The captain kept looking between the coastline and the chart. Something was wrong. The navigator had been certain they were still far from this particular section of land. Yet there it was, a coastline that appeared to exist where the map showed nothing. The boat scraped against the sand. The men climbed out. Their boots sank into the wet beach. For a moment, nobody moved. They simply stood there. Land felt strange beneath their feet. One sailor laughed. Another picked up a handful of sand and let it fall through his fingers. After months of wooden decks and endless waves, even ordinary ground felt extraordinary. The captain looked toward the forest. "Stay together." They moved inland. The first thing they discovered was water. A narrow stream flowed from between the rocks. The navigator crouched beside it. He tasted a few drops. Fresh. The men nearly cheered. They filled their containers. The captain immediately ordered them to stop drinking directly from the stream. Nobody knew what was upstream. They would collect the water and treat it as carefully as their supplies allowed. But another discovery waited farther ahead. Fruit. Trees covered with unfamiliar fruit hung along the edge of the forest. The cook examined one carefully. Nobody wanted to risk poisoning the entire crew. The captain selected only what the cook recognized or believed safe. The men ate cautiously. For the first time in weeks, they had something fresh. But their relief did not last, because the forest was silent, too silent. There were no voices, no distant tools, no animals large enough to be heard moving through the undergrowth. Only insects, birds, and the constant sound of the stream. The captain looked back toward the ocean. Their ship was still visible beyond the beach. That mattered. A sailor suddenly shouted, "Captain!" Everyone turned. He was pointing toward the rocks. There were footprints, human footprints, fresh ones. The captain crouched beside them, bare feet, several sets, leading from the beach toward the forest. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. They were not alone. The captain stood. "Back to the ship." Nobody argued. They returned quickly. When they reached the beach, the captain looked toward the forest again. Nothing moved, but the footprints remained. back aboard the ship, the crew debated what to do. Some wanted to leave immediately. Others argued that abandoning a source of fresh water would be foolish. The captain listened. Then he made a decision. They would remain offshore. They would replenish their water. They would collect enough fresh food to extend the voyage. But nobody would enter the forest again without a larger group. It was a practical decision. Pirates survived by managing risk, not by pretending risk did not exist. For the next 2 days, small groups went ashore. They collected water, gathered food, cut firewood. They never traveled far from the beach, and every time they returned, they found new footprints. Sometimes they appeared near the stream, sometimes near the trees. Once they appeared directly beside the place where the longboat had been pulled onto the sand. Someone was watching them. The crew became nervous. Then on the 3rd morning, the captain discovered something worse. The ship's water barrels had been moved. Not much, only a few inches, but enough. Someone had been aboard during the night. The crew searched the entire vessel. Nothing was missing. No food, no weapons, no gold, nothing. Whoever had come aboard had not stolen anything. They had only looked. The captain ordered double watches. Nobody slept comfortably. That night, the sea was calm. The moon appeared through thin clouds. A sailor standing watch near the bow suddenly froze. He saw something on the beach. A figure, standing between the trees, watching the ship. He called the captain. By the time the captain reached the deck, the figure was gone, but something remained. A small fire burning deep inside the forest. The captain raised his telescope. The flame was barely visible. Someone was there. The crew wanted to leave, but the captain refused. They still needed water, and their provisions were limited. The sea had already taught them the price of wasting supplies. They would not abandon a valuable resource because of fear alone. At dawn, the captain took a larger party ashore. This time, they followed the footprints. The trail led through the forest. Branches had been broken, leaves had been disturbed. Someone had walked this path recently. The captain raised his hand. Everyone stopped. Ahead, they heard voices. Quiet voices, human voices. The crew moved carefully through the trees. Then the forest opened. A small clearing appeared, and in the center stood a wooden structure, a hut. Smoke rose from a small fire beside it. The men stared. Someone lived here. But there was something even stranger. Beside the hut stood a tall wooden post. Carved into it was a symbol. The captain recognized it. It was a maritime symbol used by sailors long ago, a warning. The navigator stepped closer. His face changed. "What does it mean?" the captain asked. The navigator swallowed. "It means..." He looked toward the ocean. "Ships shouldn't stop here." The captain studied the carving. Then he noticed another mark beneath it. Much older, almost worn away. A date. The navigator cleaned the wood with his sleeve. The numbers became visible. The year was more than a century old. The captain stared. If the warning had been carved that long ago, someone had known about this island for generations, and someone had deliberately kept it away from the charts. Then a voice came from behind them. "You're not supposed to be here." Every man reached for a weapon. An old man stood at the edge of the clearing. His clothes were worn, his hair was grey. He held no weapon, but his expression was serious. The captain stepped forward. "Who are you?" The old man looked at him, then at the pirate crew, then toward the distant sea. "I could ask you the same thing. We need water, I know. We need food, I know. The captain narrowed his eyes. Then why were you watching us? The old man looked almost amused. Because I've watched sailors make the same mistake for 100 years. The crew became silent. The captain glanced at the carved warning. What mistake? The old man pointed toward the sea. Thinking the ocean is empty. Nobody spoke. He continued. The ocean remembers every ship that crosses it. The captain stared at him. Then the old man said something that made the entire crew go silent. There is a reason your charts don't show this island. Why? Because the people who knew about it never wanted anyone else to find it. The wind moved through the trees. The ocean crashed against the distant shore, and somewhere beyond the horizon, a ship's bell rang. Once, then again. The captain turned toward the sea. There was no ship visible. The old man whispered, Someone else has arrived. The bell rang again. Once, then silence. The pirate crew stood frozen in the clearing. Every man was looking toward the ocean, but there was nothing there. No sail, no mast, no ship, only waves rolling beneath the morning sun. The captain slowly lowered his telescope. Where did that bell come from? The old man did not answer immediately. He walked toward the edge of the clearing and stared at the water. Then he said quietly, That is the sound ships hear before they disappear. Nobody laughed. Nobody questioned him. The old man's face was too serious. The captain stepped closer. You said you've watched sailors make the same mistake for 100 years. The old man nodded. Because they come here looking for what the island can give them. Fresh water, food, wood, safe harbor. The old man turned. And they always believe those things are the island's greatest gifts. The captain waited. They aren't. What is? The old man looked toward the forest. Time. The captain frowned. The old man explained. This island sits where several ocean currents meet. Ships can become trapped in them. A vessel can remain near these waters for days without realizing it. The navigator immediately understood. That explained the strange coastline. It explained why their calculations had been wrong. The currents had carried them far from their expected course. The island was not supernatural, at least, not entirely. The old man led them toward the hut. Inside were charts, dozens of them. Some were new, others were incredibly old. The captain picked one up. It showed the same coastline, but the coastline was marked with warnings, dangerous currents, hidden reefs, storm paths, freshwater locations, safe anchorage. The old man had been mapping the island for decades. You've been helping ships survive. The old man shook his head. No. He pointed toward the charts. I've been helping them leave. The distinction was important. The island could provide everything a stranded crew needed, but it could also encourage them to stay. A crew that stopped for water might remain for food. A crew that remained for food might discover shelter, and a crew that discovered shelter might decide to wait for better weather. Days became weeks, weeks became months. Then the crew forgot where they had come from. The captain looked at the old man. Who are you? The old man finally gave him a name. Elias Vale. The captain studied him. How long have you lived here? Elias smiled faintly. Long enough to know that nobody survives the ocean alone. He pointed toward the charts. Every ship needs water. Every ship needs food. But more than anything, he paused, it needs a reason to keep moving. The captain thought about his own crew. They had been at sea for months. They were exhausted. Their supplies were low. Their nerves were failing. The island offered safety. But the captain knew something now. Safety could become dangerous when it made you forget your destination. Suddenly, a sailor rushed into the hut. "Captain!" Everyone turned. "There is a ship!" The captain immediately followed him outside. They ran toward the beach. This time, there really was a ship, far beyond the reef, a dark, sailing vessel. Its sails were torn, its mast leaned dangerously. No flag flew above it. The ship drifted without direction. The crew watched as it slowly approached. Then the vessel disappeared behind a wall of mist. The captain stared. "Where did it go?" Elias answered quietly. "Into the current." The captain turned. "Can we reach them?" Elias shook his head. "Not if you follow the ship." "Why?" "Because the current will carry you where it carried them." The captain looked toward the water. The fog was spreading. The navigator examined the compass. The needle was trembling, not spinning wildly, just moving enough to make accurate navigation difficult. The old man pointed toward the cliffs. "There is another way." They followed him through a narrow path. The path climbed the cliffs. At the top was a small stone platform. From there, the captain could see the entire coastline. The ocean looked different from above. He could see currents moving beneath the surface. One current moved north, another curved south. Between them was a narrow channel of relatively calm water. Elias pointed. "That's the way out." The navigator studied it. "If we reach that channel, you can leave the island's current." The captain looked at him. "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" Elias gave him a tired smile. "Because you weren't ready to leave earlier." The captain did not like the answer, but he understood it. The crew had needed to learn something. The sea did not reward impatience, it rewarded preparation. Back aboard the pirate ship, the crew began preparing for departure. Fresh water filled the barrels. Fresh food was stored below deck. Damaged ropes were replaced. The sails were repaired. The hull was inspected. For the first time in weeks, the ship was ready. But then the cook discovered something. One of the food barrels was empty, not spoiled, not damaged, empty. Someone had taken the food. The captain searched the crew. Nobody admitted anything. Then they found footprints near the storage area, bare feet, the same footprints they had seen on the island. Someone had boarded the ship again. That night, the captain ordered every sailor to remain awake. They waited. Midnight came. Nothing. 1 o'clock. Nothing. 2. Still nothing. Then a sound came from below deck. A wooden crate moving. The captain grabbed a lantern. He descended the stairs. The crew followed. At the bottom, they found a man hiding behind the barrels. He was young, dirty, thin, terrified. He raised his hands. "Don't shoot!" The captain stared. "Who are you?" The young man looked toward the open hatch. "I came from the other ship." The crew went silent. "What other ship?" "The one you saw." The captain stepped closer. "Where is your crew?" The young man shook his head. "Dead." Silence. "How?" The young sailor looked toward the dark sea. "The current." The captain waited. The sailor continued. "Our ship was trapped. We tried to fight it. We couldn't. We lost the mast. We ran out of water. Then the fog came." He swallowed. "When it cleared, the island was there." The captain frowned. "How did you survive?" The young sailor looked at the barrels. "I came ashore. Alone." He nodded. "And the others?" The young man looked down. "They stayed." "Why?" He hesitated. "Because they found something." The captain felt a chill. "What?" The sailor slowly looked toward Elias's hut. a place where the water never runs out. The crew stared at one another. The young sailor continued. They found a hidden spring deep inside the island. Fresh water, food, shelter. They said we could stay. The captain asked, "And you?" The young sailor shook his head. "I saw what happened to the men who stayed before us." The captain's voice became quiet. "What happened?" The sailor looked directly at him. "They forgot they were sailors." The ship fell silent. Then Elias appeared at the bottom of the stairs. He had heard everything. The old man looked at the young sailor. "You found the spring." The sailor nodded. Elias closed his eyes. Then he said, "Then the island has started keeping people again." The captain looked at him. "What does that mean?" Elias turned toward the dark ocean. "It means the storm is coming." The crew rushed onto the deck. Far beyond the horizon, black clouds were rising. The wind had changed. The sea was beginning to swell. And somewhere inside the island, hundreds of years of abandoned sailors were waiting. The wind arrived before the rain. It struck the ship so suddenly that the sails snapped like gunshots above the deck. The crew grabbed ropes. Barrels rolled across the deck. Loose equipment crashed against the railings. The captain shouted orders. "Secure everything!" Men moved immediately. They had learned that panic wasted time, and at sea, time could kill. The dark clouds that had appeared beyond the horizon were now directly above them. The ocean had changed. The calm water was gone. Huge waves rose around the ship, lifting it high before dropping it into deep valleys of water. The mast groaned. The ropes screamed. Rain began falling sideways. The captain looked towards the cliffs. The island was disappearing behind curtains of water. "Elias!" The old man stood near the bow. "Can we stay here?" Elias shook his head. "Not in this weather." "Then where?" "The channel." The captain stared at him. "The current?" "Yes." "You said it could destroy us." "I said fighting it could destroy you." The captain understood. There was a difference between fighting the sea and using it. The navigator spread the chart across the deck. Rain immediately covered the paper. He protected it with his body. "The channel is narrow," he shouted. "How narrow?" "Too narrow for mistakes." The captain looked at the crew. Everyone was already exhausted. They had spent months fighting hunger, thirst, storms, repairs, and uncertainty. Now they had to navigate through a dangerous channel during the worst weather they had seen. But remaining where they were was even more dangerous. The captain made the decision. "Raise the storm sail." The crew moved. The large sails were lowered. Smaller sails were raised. The ship turned toward the channel. The waves pushed against the hull. For several terrifying minutes, the vessel seemed unable to change direction. Then the current caught it. The ship began moving. Fast, too fast. The captain grabbed the railing. The island cliffs rushed past. Water exploded against the rocks. The crew stared ahead. One mistake, and the ship would be destroyed. The navigator shouted directions. "Left!" The helmsman turned. "Now right!" The ship swung. A wave crashed over the bow. 3 sailors fell. Others pulled them back. The captain looked toward the channel. There, between 2 enormous cliffs, was a narrow passage. The sea was pulling toward it. The captain understood what Elias had meant. They could not defeat the current. They had to cooperate with it. "Hold the course." The ship entered the passage. For a moment, everything became strangely quiet. The enormous waves were blocked by the cliffs. The wind weakened. The ship accelerated. The crew stared at one another. They were alive. Then they heard something, a bell, far behind them, once, twice, 3 times. The captain turned. The fog was coming. It rolled between the cliffs like smoke. Elias appeared beside him. "Don't look back," the captain frowned. "Why?" "Because the fog makes people remember." "Remember what?" "The life they wanted." The captain stared at him. The fog thickened. Shapes appeared inside it. Ships, dozens of them. Old wooden vessels, broken masts, torn sails. Some were almost completely covered in seaweed. Others looked as though they had sunk decades ago. Yet they were moving. The crew stood frozen. The ships were not sailing through the water. They were drifting above it. Ghostly outlines emerged and disappeared within the fog. Then the crew began hearing voices, their own names, whispers, promises. One sailor heard the voice of his mother. Another heard his wife. Another heard his brother. They were calling from the fog. "Come home. Come with us. You've been gone too long. Leave the ship." The men became confused. Some moved toward the rail. The captain grabbed one sailor. "Don't listen." But the voice continued. The sailor's eyes filled with tears. "My wife." The captain shook him. "That's not your wife." The sailor stared at him. "How do you know?" "Because she's not here." The sailor looked toward the fog. A woman's silhouette appeared. She was standing on the deck of one of the ghost ships, smiling. The sailor began climbing over the railing. 2 men pulled him back. He screamed, "Let me go!" The captain shouted, "That's not her!" The fog surrounded them. For a moment, the entire crew was caught between reality and memory. Then Elias shouted, "Look at the stars!" Everyone turned upward. The clouds had briefly separated. A handful of stars appeared. Elias pointed, "Follow the sky." The navigator immediately understood. The compass was unreliable. The fog was confusing, but the stars were real. He adjusted the ship. "Northwest," the captain shouted the order. The crew worked together. The ship moved through the channel, slowly. The fog began to disappear. The ghost ships vanished. The voices faded. The sea became visible again. Then sunlight appeared. The storm was behind them. The crew stood silently. They had survived. But the captain noticed something. The young sailor who had come from the other ship was missing. They searched the deck. Nothing. Then someone shouted from the bow. A figure was standing on the rocks. The young sailor. He had somehow left the ship. The captain stared. They were still inside the channel. The young sailor stood beside the water. He was smiling. "Come back," the captain shouted. The sailor shook his head. "I can't." "Why?" He looked toward the island. "They're waiting for me." The captain understood. The island had already entered his mind. The young sailor turned and disappeared into the forest. The captain wanted to follow. Elias stopped him. "No. He'll die. Maybe. Then we leave him." Elias looked at the captain. "Every sailor must choose what he is willing to lose." The captain stared at the forest. Then he remembered the hundreds of men who had disappeared here. Men who had arrived seeking food, water, shelter, safety, and stayed until they forgot the ocean. The captain finally understood the island's true danger. It did not kill sailors. It gave them everything they wanted, until they no longer wanted to leave. The pirate ship reached open water. The crew repaired what they could. They counted their supplies, fresh water, food, wood, sails, enough to continue. But something had changed. They were no longer simply trying to survive. They were trying to reach home. The captain looked at the horizon. For the first time in months, he felt something he had nearly forgotten. Hope. Then the navigator called from the mast. Land! Everyone turned. Another coastline was visible far ahead. This one was on their chart. A real destination. The crew cheered, but the captain did not. He was staring at something floating beside the ship. A wooden box. It had been carried out of the fog. The crew pulled it aboard. The captain opened it. Inside was a collection of old maps, maps of the island, maps of forgotten currents, maps showing ships that had vanished. And at the bottom, a list of names, hundreds of them, sailors who had disappeared over the years. The captain read the final name. His face went pale. It belonged to a captain who had vanished almost 100 years earlier. A captain whose story every sailor knew. A captain who was believed to have died at sea. But beneath the name was a single sentence. He never died. The captain looked toward the island. It was already disappearing into the distance, and somewhere beyond the fog, the abandoned sailors were still waiting. The wooden box remained open on the captain's table. The list of names lay beneath the lantern. Hundreds of sailors, hundreds of ships, hundreds of men who had disappeared from the known oceans, and whose stories had slowly turned into legends. The crew stood around the table in silence. One sailor finally spoke. "Captain," he pointed toward the final name. Who was he? The captain looked down. The name belonged to Captain Elias Vale. The crew froze. The old man on the island, the man who had helped them find fresh water, the man who had shown them the safe channel, the man who had warned them about the fog. Elias. The captain stared at the name again. Then he understood. The old man had never been living on the island by accident. He had been there for decades, perhaps longer. The captain ordered the ship turned around. The crew protested. "We just escaped. We have enough supplies. We're finally going home." But the captain shook his head. "We're going back for Elias." The crew fell silent. They knew what the captain was risking. The island was dangerous. The fog was dangerous. The current was dangerous. But the old man had saved them. And a pirate captain did not abandon a man who had saved his crew. The ship turned. For hours they sailed back toward the island. The coastline appeared near sunset. Dark cliffs, dense forest, the same beach. But something had changed. There were ships, dozens of them, anchored around the island, old ships, newer ships, ships from different generations, ships that should have been lost forever. The crew stared. All those vessels had been trapped here. They had not sunk. They had simply stopped leaving. The captain ordered the ship closer. Then he saw Elias standing on the beach, waiting. The captain lowered the longboat. When he reached shore, Elias looked at him and smiled. "You came back." The captain held up the list. "Your name is here." Elias looked at it. For the first time, his expression changed. "I wondered when you'd find that. You disappeared 100 years ago." Elias nodded. "I did." The captain stared at him. "But you're alive." Elias looked toward the island. "Not exactly." The captain said nothing. Elias explained. He had been the captain of a merchant ship many years earlier. His crew had become trapped by the island's currents. They found the spring. They found food. They repaired their ship. But when the storm passed, his crew refused to leave. They had discovered a place where survival seemed effortless. No storms, no hunger, no thirst, no long voyages. They convinced themselves they could stay. Elias tried to leave, but the crew mutinied. He remained on the island. Years passed, then decades. The sailors who stayed slowly disappeared. Some died. Some became part of the island's strange legends. And Elias remained, waiting for another ship, waiting for someone who would understand the lesson. The captain asked, "What lesson?" Elias looked directly at him. "The ocean does not test you by making survival impossible." He paused. "Sometimes it tests you by making survival too comfortable." The captain understood. The real danger was not always the storm. Sometimes it was the desire to stop moving, the desire to settle, to forget, to become comfortable enough that you no longer remember where you wanted to go. Elias walked toward the water. Pirates survive months at sea because they understand one thing. What? Everything is temporary. The ship, the food, the water, the storm, the calm, the fear, even the voyage. A sailor survives by adapting. When the wind changes, he changes. When the food becomes scarce, he rations. When the ship breaks, he repairs. When the storm arrives, he respects it. And when land finally appears, he remembers that the journey must continue. The captain looked at the fleet of abandoned ships. "What happens to them?" Elias smiled. "They can leave." The captain looked surprised. "They've always been able to leave." "Then why didn't they?" "Because they stopped believing they could." The captain returned to his ship. He ordered the crew to prepare. One by one, the abandoned vessels began raising their sails. The beach became alive. Men emerged from the forest. Old sailors, young sailors, people who had spent years believing they had no way back. They climbed aboard the ships. Sails rose, ropes tightened. The island's hidden fleet began moving toward the channel. The captain's ship led them. The current grabbed the vessels. The familiar fog appeared. But this time, the crews did not listen to the voices. They did not look back. They watched the stars. They watched the waves. They trusted their navigation. And slowly, the fleet passed through the channel. The fog disappeared. The island faded behind them. For the first time in generations, the lost ships returned to the open ocean. Days passed, then weeks. The crew continued sailing. They rationed their food, collected rainwater, repaired the ship, watched the stars. They still faced storms. They still faced hunger. They still faced exhaustion. But something was different. They no longer feared the ocean in the same way. They understood it. The sea was not their enemy. It was their environment. To survive it, they had to respect it. One evening, the captain stood alone at the bow. The sun was sinking beneath the horizon. A young sailor approached him. "Captain?" The captain turned. "Yes." "How did pirates survive for months at sea?" The captain looked at the endless ocean. Then he smiled. "Not by being stronger than the sea." He looked toward the crew. "By learning how to live with it." The young sailor nodded. The captain continued. "They carried water because they knew thirst would come. They preserved food because they knew fresh food would disappear. They repaired their ships because they knew the ocean would damage them. They watched the sky because they knew the weather could change. They learned the currents because they knew the sea could carry them farther than they intended. And they watched the horizon." He paused, "because no matter how long the voyage became, they needed to remember where they were going." The sailor looked at the horizon. "Was it worth it?" The captain smiled. "What?" "The months at sea." The captain looked behind him. at the crew, at the repaired sails, at the barrels of water, at the ship that had survived. Then he looked ahead. "Ask me when we reach land." The young sailor laughed. The sun disappeared, night arrived, the stars filled the sky, and the ship continued forward. No magical treasure, no impossible paradise, no promise that the sea would become gentle, only a crew that had learned how to survive. They understood that survival was not one heroic moment. It was thousands of small decisions, a cup of water saved, a rope repaired, a sail protected, a meal rationed, a storm respected, a course corrected, a night spent watching the stars. That was how sailors survived, not because the ocean was merciful, but because they learned to adapt to something that never was. The ocean remained enormous, unpredictable, beautiful, terrifying, and endless. But now the crew understood something their ancestors had known for centuries. The sea does not promise to bring you home. You have to learn how to navigate your way there. And beneath the moonlit sky, the pirate ship sailed toward the horizon. The water stretched ahead, the stars burned above, and somewhere beyond the darkness, land was waiting. The voyage was over, but the ocean would always remain. If you enjoyed this journey into the brutal reality of life at sea, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. And remember, my friend, the ocean kept many secrets. We're just getting started.